Yes, hello and good evening to all. Um, as always, on the Monday evening, we have a coaching session for Simulator Controller, and today's topic will be going more into the details for all the race assistants. We covered a couple of this already in some of the other sessions, and we also had one session including a live demo for the race engineer. But there's a lot more to talk about, especially how you can configure them more in the details and how they collaborate and how they work together with all the other tools of Simulator Controller. So our session will have four sections. The first one is, as always, I will start with the configuration and an overview. Then we will take a look at all the commands and features of all the assistants. We will talk about how the assistants collaborate together and how they provide data to the tools like the strategy workbench, the race center, and so on. And last but not least, we will have a short section where you can see how to provide your own voice commands, change some of the pre-built phrases, or even completely translate a service of a voice assistant to a different language. I'm still hoping that someone is doing it for French or for Italian, for the Italian language. Would be wonderful. Okay, so let's start. First, we will take a look at how to configure the assistants using the setup wizard, and we will also take a look into the low-level configuration because a lot of the stuff is much more comprehensible when you see how it's doing in the low-level configuration. Okay, but first, let's go through a simulator setup. I think it's quite clear. You have to choose one or all or more of the assistants, one word up front. They are all completely independent. So you can use the race engineer standalone, or you can even use the race spotter standalone. But as a team, they are much better. So maybe you give them a try and start with all of them, and you can later disable one if you don't need the spotter, for example, because you use a different application for that. Okay, here on the next page, there are a couple of presets which also apply to the assistants. I will come to this later on because I will first show you how to configure the assistants to the max. We already talked in the different session about voice control and how to change the voices and the names and the listening engines for the assistants. So I will skip that for today. But we will take a look here. As you can see, you will have one configuration page for each assistant, and you can have a different configuration for a given assistant for each of the simulators you are running. So if you want to, for example, now configure Assetto Corsa, no, let's take Automobilista 2. All the choices you have here and here will apply to Automobilista 2. And you see that for example, when I switch this here to a different value, that it will jump back to the original one. So you can see you have different configurations here. Let's talk a little bit about the settings, although there is also a separate session available already. The assistance uses a lot of settings you have to dial for your specific session or race. You have the race settings application to do this. For example, you can put the starting cold tire pressures here. You can tell the race engineer what's the optimal hot tire pressures for this session and so on. As you might have seen in the other session, there is a possibility to manage all these settings using the session database. Because it's most of the time these settings will be more or less constant for a given simulator or for a given car or a given track. For example, here you can say that for the track Spa-Francorchamps, the pit lane delta is 57 seconds, so you don't have to put it in here each and every time you go to the track. But if you don't want to use this more complex tool, you can still use the race settings. Depending on what you have chosen, you say here how to load the settings. Load from previous session means use the values from race settings. Load from the database means use the values from the database. Other settings here below to mention is the so-called data analysis group. The race assistants are using a rule engine and a knowledge base. There are some kind of artificial intelligence applications. So you have to give them some time to learn before they can help you. For example, the first few laps will be used to learn about the tire pressures, the lap times, your driving style, and so on. I recommend to use at least 2 laps for learning. Higher values might increase the quality a little bit, but 2 laps are enough for most of the cases. 1 or 0 will give you some kind of wonky results in the first few laps regarding tire pressure recommendation and stuff like that. So stick to 2 or more. The statistical window is used whenever an assistant needs to calculate an average value. For example, if you want to plan a pit stop, the race engineer will estimate the amount of fuel to be refueled, and it calculates the required amount of fuel using a statistical approach. And here you say how much laps you will take into account for this statistical computation and how each lap is considered into this floating average. The damping factor means the last lap will have a full weight. The lap before the last lap will have a full weight minus the damping factor, for in this example 0.8. The lap before the last lap will have 0.6 and so on. So if you, for example, increase the window to 7, you might go here something like 1.5, so that older laps will become more and more less and less important for the average. This value here for the race engineer says how many laps the race engineer will look at your lap times with regards to an incidence, and it will compare your lap times in this window with the lap times before the incident, and will derive whether it be of benefit to come in for an unplanned pit stop to repair the damage, or uh, well, or that the repair costs, including pit lane delta, repair time, and so on, is not worth it. Okay. Using this list here, you can create a couple of bindings for your controller to trigger commands which the assistant provides. Most of them are similar to the commands you can give using voice control, but as I said in a different session, it might be helpful if you're in a close battle with one of your opponents to simply press a button to say that the next pit stop should be planned, then to press the push to talk button, talk to the engineer, and so on. It would be much faster, much easier, and will not distract you so much as talking to the assistant. The page for the strategy is quite similar. Okay, it does not have any tire pressure information. The data analysis window is a little bit smaller, but the race strategies has a lot of post-race actions. We will talk about race reports, telemetry data for the strategy workbench, and the race review later on. And for the spotter, you can give a default value for all the warnings, alerts, and information announcements the spotter has. You can disable these alerts later on using voice commands, but these are the settings where the spotter starts with. Okay, I just saw that I forgot something. Here in the race engineer, this the group for tire pressures. The race engineer has a lot to do with tire pressures, and it needs to know the cold tire pressures at the session beginning. You can give him here using the race settings, here or here for wet tires, which means at session begin, load them from the race settings. But you can also, in some of the simulators, use the import from simulator command. You will find information about this in the documentation. The supported simulators are, as far as I know, Assetto Corsa Competizione and R Factor 2. These two simulators allow the import of this information, but you still have to prepare something at least in ACC, so that you will get the correct results. And at the end of the session, you can store this data into a database. You have the option that the engineer will ask you if you have been satisfied. If the pressures have been okay, then you can store it into the database. You can always save it, like the settings, or here for the strategies. Telemetry data will always be saved. Race report will always be saved, but you can use here ask as well. So lots of settings to play with. It really depends how you want to use the assistants, what are the right settings for you. Let's go back to the presets. Okay, here you have a couple of presets you can select to the right side, which changes the configuration which will be generated by a simulator setup. You first have some interesting preset with which you can mute the race engineer and the race strategist, which means that they are these assistants will be there, but they will not talk to you. This can be of usage for all those of you who don't want to use the services during a session, but only want to record data. So the other possibility to disable a race assistant is using the simulator configuration or simulator setup to completely switch it off. For example, here you can say this plugin is not active anymore. So the race engineer will be deactivated completely. But this means that it will also not be there to collect any data. Therefore, you have this preset. You can move it to the right. And from this time on, okay, you have to generate the configuration in the last step. But from this time on, the race engineer will not talk to you anymore. The muted presets are available for the strategist and the race engineer. It is not available for the spotter because a muted spotter is of no use. There you go, switch it off and everything will be fine. Another interesting preset here is the race engineer without pit stop control. This means that the race engineer will behave like it's planning a pit stop and preparing the pit stop, but it will not enter any values in the pit stop dialogues of the various simulators. When do you want to use this? Maybe if you don't trust the assistant, you might use the engineer to create all the values. You will the values will be given to you by voice, and then you will dial the settings into the pit stop dialog on your own. And the last one here is where it is. Yes, the different speaker voices. We covered that already in a different session. If you start with fresh installation, all assistants will use the same voice to talk to you, which might be quite disturbing or not easy for you to tell who's talking at the moment. So always use this one or use the technologies we have introduced in the session about voice control. Okay, so let's take a look at the low-level configuration. So for a better understanding how simulator setup creates these functionalities. For example, let's use the race engineer. When the plugin configuration is generated, there is the argument race assistant listener on, which means that the race engineer will listen to your voice input. If it's off, which can be done here by simply saying off and save, the race engineer will never react to your voice commands. And this might be helpful if you put all the commands you want to use for the race engineer on your Stream Deck, for example. You don't want to use voice control. This is also possible here in simulator setup by disabling voice control and leaving only a controller and input devices enabled. So you can still use the race assistance, but you are restricted to giving commands by pushing a button. The other thing I can show you here is, let's move forward again. If you have used this one, for example, this means that for all simulators, the open pit stop option here will be off, so that the pit stop dialog would not be will not be open by the race assistance. So you can achieve most of this, what you can do with the presets. Now you can achieve all of what you can do with the presets, also with the low-level configuration, but there are combinations which are only possible here. Okay. Now I will show you some of the documentation. Each assistant has its own documentation page, race engineer, strategies, and so on. And you will find, let me search for it, it's faster. You will find here a section enabling and disabling specific warnings and announcements. For example, for the race engineer, you can ask for no more fuel warnings, please, or please no more fuel warnings. Any combination here is possible, which means that the race engineer will not come into life when you are running out of fuel. Not very helpful, but possible. Also for damage warnings, damage analysis, weather warnings, and so on. For example, damage warnings, especially at the beginning of a race, might disturb you. That the race engineer tells you every 15 seconds that you collected some damage. So you might start the race with no more damage warnings. And after the positions has been settled and there are some gaps between the cars, you can tell the engineer, give me damage warnings, and he will do this from that moment on. In the next version, another command here will be available, which is simply called shut up. You can this will completely disable every voice output temporarily unless you asked for something. For example, if you ask, can you plan a pit stop? The voice interaction will be as normal as before, but in the shut up mode, no assistant will tell you something from its own intention. Will be available on Friday. Let's take a look about the commands which are available for the different assistants. You will have an interacting with section in each of the documentation. And there you will find a link to the grammar files. But you can also take a look into our GitHub, where you find all the commands which are available for one of the assistants. So you can browse them and see what's available. For example, the race engineer, as it's obvious, has a lot of commands about pit stop planning, for example, how much fuel is left, can you prepare the pit stop, can we refuel a couple of liters, or can we switch to wet tires, and so on and so on. So take a look here and you will see what commands are available. We will see at the end of the session how to change these commands to your own preferences if you want. It's possible to override the default commands on your own, but it's more for the experts. Okay, if you open up one of these files, it's much more complex. The commands are here, but you can also take a look at every sentence or every phrase this given engineer, this given assistant might tell you. See a lot of possibilities for the race engineer, and the others are as long as well. Okay, let's come to a short overview what each assistant is about. As I already mentioned, the race engineer observes your fuel consumption, your tire pressures and tire consumption. It will react and analyze and react to damage. It can plan and prepare a pit stop, and it is capable to store the values from the last pit stop or from the complete session into the session database. For example, the tire pressures, we will see this later on if we take a look here. The strategist is, as the name says, responsible for the strategy. It can calculate the best lap for a given for a coming pit stop by incorporating the knowledge about your opponents, the pit lane delta, and it will analyze the traffic situation after the pit stop, and it might come with a lap which is 1 or 2 laps earlier than the one you will have chosen if you will completely deplete your fuel capacity before going to the pit. The strategist can also simulate the race for the future. For example, if you're suspicious, what are your possible results when you're in the last third of the race? For example, if it's possible to overtake 1 or 2 more cars, you can ask the strategist to simulate the race for the next 10 laps, and the strategist will take into account the complete performance of yourself and all your opponents, and try to derive a race situation in 10 laps, and will tell you whether you will gain or lose some positions. The strategist also knows everything about your opponents for sure. It can tell you their lap times, the gaps between you and the cars in front of you or behind you, and it will also analyze your performance during the session, and will give you a post-race review on your performance, and will also store all these information into the database. The last one, the spotter. Okay, it's a spotter. It will tell you everything about the cars nearby you, but it's also the same knowledge as the strategist about your opponents. It needs that to tell you whether you are gaining or losing time, whether it is possible to overtake someone, and you can ask the spotter the same questions as a strategist. For example, what is my position, what are the lap times, and so on. I have done this because someone might don't want to use the strategist but want to use the spotter and will still want to have all these information. So if you find these commands in the in simulator setup or in the simulator configuration, don't be surprised. There are a lot of duplicates there. This is on purpose. Okay, any questions so far? Seems not, so I will continue. Okay, as I said, the engineer is capable to store the tire pressures from the session into a database. Both the hot tire pressures and the cold tire pressures, which has been derived by the engineer with various calculations, will be stored in the database, and you can use these data for upcoming sessions or as a kind of dictionary for all your tracks. I will show you how to do this. This is a tool session database, this one here. And you select the simulator, select the car you want to look at, select the track, and then you go to the tire pressure advisor and you will see there's a lot of data in there. For example, 26 laps for 24 degrees air temperature and 30 degrees track temperature has been recorded. And from all these recorded pressures, this tire pressure advisor can give you the most precise recommendation for the tire pressure when you go to the next session on this track. How do you want to use this? You select the weather, then the compound, and then you dial the temperature you currently have, and you see here the area where the recommendation for the cold tire pressures will be given. And as you can see, if I change the temperatures, this value jumps, which means for this precise combination, 21 air and 23 track, there is no exact entry in the database, but the advisor will try to interpolate or extrapolate this value, and the color gives you the certainty factor. Yellow means okay, quite okay, but a little bit off. Light green is already quite good, and dark green means we have an exact match, which is obvious because this is this entry, or all the entries, all the 11 entries for this environmental condition. Okay, you can use the session database for your own if you prepare your session, but you can also tell the race engineer using this little check mark that when the race engineer plans the next pit stop, it will not only take into account the value that it has derived by its own computation, but it will also take a look into your database and will come up with some kind of average between what the engineer has calculated and what can be found in your database. What the race engineer also will do, it will, if you check this, incorporate further corrections based on temperature trends, which means it will use, for example, a higher pressure than currently needed when the temperatures are falling, which is really important for late evening or early morning sessions. For example, when you're running an endurance race. I'm currently loading in the background one of my recent endurance races. Please give me a moment. Okay, let's take this one. Here you can see from a 6-hour race at the Hungaroring that the ambient temperature was constantly falling, and in this situation the race engineer will try to use higher pressures for the pit stop, so that on average for the coming stint the pressures are quite good, a little bit too high at the beginning, a little bit too low at the end. Okay. So this is the data the engineer stores away. When you have chosen ask, he will ask you or she will ask you at the end of the session if you have been satisfied with the setup, if you want to transfer the data to the database. The race strategist, as I said before, has 3 different kinds of actions at the end of the session. First of all, it can save a race report. I think race reports you already have seen. You can open it here. And let's take this one. Race report will give you a complete overview of the race with the final results. You can take a look at the driver performance, choose different drivers here for the evaluation as well. You can see the position development during the race, and so on and so on. Lots of data to play with. Let's take a look here at only a couple of laps so that we will see some data. And here you have the consistency graph for the given driver in car number 71 for the lap 2 to 12. This is all derived by the data the strategies collects during your session, and when you have chosen, where is my window? Here, that the race report should be saved at the end of the session. Other data collected by the strategists are the telemetry data necessary for strategy development. We already have had a session for the strategy workbench, so I don't want to go here into the details, but only take a short look. For example, here, Mount Panorama, tire data, everything recorded by the strategist. Let's take a look at the lap time dependency from tire usage. And as you can see here, this is slowly increasing here, so 35 laps is quite okay on Mount Panorama, but if I would have recorded more, the curve will getting steeper and steeper, which means that the tires are used up. And this information is used by the strategy workbench when you run a simulation using tire usage optimization and so on. So it is very important that you enable the collection of telemetry data by the strategist, because that's the heart of the data collection you have, and it's very valuable for strategy development and analysis. All these data are also available live, not post-race, but live, if you use the race center for your endurance races, or if you have a teammate which helps you in a sprint race, for example, a specialized engineer which is part of your team, you can use the race center also for single user races. And then all these data collected by the race engineer and race strategist will be available live to play with and will be updated each and every lap. So you will have all the data at hand during the session, and you can use it to come up with a different strategy, for example, after a severe weather change, and so on and so on. So, any questions up to here? Seems not. Okay, then I will come to the last part. And there, as you probably know, everything of your local configuration or your local data of simulator controller is stored in your documents folder in simulator controller. The database we talked about a lot is here. It's named database, but you can switch the database by choosing a different location. If you want to use it to a different location, or for example want to take a look at the database of one of your colleagues to analyze his data, this is possible using this settings button here. Simply select a different location and you will be guided through either copying all the data from here to this new location or integrating the data of your colleague. There will be an import-export feature coming in one of the next releases. I'm currently working on this. You will also find this here then. Inside the database, you will have two different folders. The first, user, is everything you collected with your cars on your tracks. This is the data you created. But depending on your consent using sharing of your data and let's say when you allowed your data to share, you will get a payback from the community, because then you will also get all the data from all others who share their data here in the community folder. Let's take a look here. For example, iRacing, Chevrolet Silverado. No, nothing here. Local and community. No, nothing here at the moment. Oh, sorry, I want to show you some data from the community, but I'm suspicious. No, nothing in here. Okay. Can't show you this at the moment, but the data is there, I know, because it's half a megabyte of data. So, okay, I will take a look later on. So, short look how it's organized. You will have the car folder, and inside the car folder you will have all the tracks, and there you have the database files. the electronics data, the tires data, and the pressures data. They are all CSV files, so you can open them using a spreadsheet or a text editor to take a look at, and even to change some values if you want to do it low level. It's possible. Okay. Another interesting location here in Simulator Controller is the grammars folder, which is empty here. But you can, for example, provide your own grammars and change either by overwriting predefined grammars or even introducing completely new grammars using this special folder here. Let's make an example to see this in action. We go to the standard location where the grammars are. Take this one here, the strategist. We make a copy, put it here, and open it with the text editor. We will delete everything but one phrase, listener grammars. Let's use this one. So doing this means we will override the joke command. Yes, the assistants are able to tell you jokes. And we will give this command a different phrase. Where is the moon? Okay, just an example. Now I want to start up the test mode for the assistants. I think you know this, but I will show you anyway. If you are playing with the voice control of your assistants, it is better to do this in a test mode than on the track until you are satisfied, and the test mode is described here using simulator controller voice commands. Here you will find the description of the test mode and how to start up the test environment. And we are currently doing this. I started the voice server. Now I will start the engineer. I will use also English here. And I will also start the strategist. So as always, for you on in Discord, you will not hear the voice output, but it will be recorded into the video, so you can take a listen afterwards. So now, if I call the engineer, hi Jonah.
Yeah, John. Have you called me?
Can you tell me a joke?
Actually, you should concentrate on your driving. But here we go. People cut their own hair. Chuck Norris pulls his own teeth.
Okay, she told me a Chuck Norris joke, but beforehand she asked me to concentrate on my driving. And now I will do it for Kato. Hi, Kato.
I am here. What can I do for you?
And now I must take a look. What was the grammar? Where is the moon? I think yes. Okay. Where is the moon?
What? You should concentrate at your driving.
Okay, she completely denied me to tell a joke. This is one of the reactions possible. There's a chance of 1 to 4 that you will be told a joke or that you will get some advice to better concentrate on your driving. But she understood the phrase, where is the moon? So that's the thing I want to show you. You can override given parts of the grammars with your own phrases, and by this way you can even completely create a translation of the grammar and place it here in the local grammar directory in your simulator controller folder, in your documents folder. If you create a translation, please be sure to also replace the suffix with the ISO code for this language. And if you have done this, sorry, you will get a new available language here in the language drop-down of the voice control page. And if you're satisfied with your translation, I will be happy to integrate it into the standard distribution. But it's a couple of hours of work, I'm sure, because the grammar files are quite large. But to simply change one or more phrases because I made a translation error or you want a different phrasing, you can go this way. It's very, very easy. You only override the phrase you named here. Okay, this is it for today. Any questions? No. Then okay, one last thing, so to say. Please take a look at the documentation. For example, here for the strategist, you will be given a typical dialogue as an example. For example, here you can see what is the best lap for the next pit stop. I recommend pit stop in lap 17, and you will be asked that the strategist will inform the race engineer, and if you accept this, Kato or the race strategist will invoke the race engineer and will hand over all the data. This is what I mentioned before. You can use them all on their own, but they collaborate. They also collaborate with the tools. We have seen in the session for the strategy workbench that you can create a strategy and set it as a race strategy, and the race strategist will use all the information in the strategy to guide you through the race. It will tell you that the pit stop is coming up. It will know how much fuel has been planned for the pit stop, whether a tire change has been planned. So everything is integrated, but everything can also be used independently. That's very important. It's part of the flexibility of the overall software package, but also part of the complexity. Sorry for that. So, famous last words. Okay. Any question? Seems not. So I will stop the recording.